Previously on the Rating Room End of Season Special.
Hello and welcome to episode 26, the End of Season Special.
The villains, the girls, the gadgets, they've seen it all.
I'm going to sound a bit like a parrot here, Andy.
He's the one that comes to mind.
James Bond has been directly responsible for 667 deaths.
Like, later on, I think things got a little bit silly.
Oh dear, I didn't mean it to sound like that.
The meat and potatoes of what we do here on the Rating Room.
So she's put a bit of thought into this one, Andy.
Angelina Jolie was mooted as a potential Bond girl.
Oh, this bit's good.
Bond doesn't go to space in the book, and nor should he.
So you got the night off, Andy, from the quiz.
So it's time to test your James Bond knowledge.
$1 million. It's a duck, isn't it? Playboy. Baron Samedi.
This is going pretty well for you, and not so much for me, but I'm enjoying it nonetheless.
Now, I'm pleased with that, Andy.
Yeah, there's no chance of you getting a 69.
Hello and welcome to the End of Season Special Part 2. So welcome. Make sure you've listened to Part 1 of this End of Season Special. So let's get straight back into it, Andy. Do you want to kick us off in our next new segment, I suppose you could call it?
It's an old classic, but it's been rebranded. It's got a lick of paint on it, hasn't it? This is where we need the Dulux colour charts back from earlier episodes, don't we? So this is where we talk about various ratings and rankings, but we never really gave it a name. So now we've branded this. This is our new segment, and going forward, this will be known as the Rank Bank. Oh, that's quite a catchy name. So welcome to the Rank Bank segment of the podcast. Like I mentioned, this is the part of the podcast where we're going to discuss, debate, and talk through various elements of the Bond franchise to determine different rankings, best to worst, from top to bottom. And everything in between. We'll be making verdicts, delivering our rankings. So let's get cracking, shall we, Jay? Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so usually I kick us off with the runtime. So we're going to recap the 5 longest and shortest Bond films in the franchise. So make sure you check out the YouTube version of this episode, because you're going to see the full list of the 25 films. And as Andy mentioned in Part 1, we've got all the information on our website, which is www.theratingroom.com. It's easier to do top 5 and bottom 5 instead of going through all 25 films for this particular bit. So I'm going to kick us off. So these are the longest 5 films. So number 1 is No Time to Die at 2 hours 43 minutes.
Number 2, Spectre, 2 hours 28 minutes.
Number 3, Casino Royale, 2 hours 24 minutes.
Number 4 is Skyfall, 2 hours 23 minutes.
And number 5 is On Her Majesty's Secret Service at 2 hours 22 minutes. So that's a monopoly there of Daniel Craig films, Andy, with 4 of the top 5.
4 of the top 4 even, with George bringing up the rear of the top, as it were. Let's skip. Between 6 and 20, like you mentioned. We can find that out on the website or on the YouTube version. And go to the shortest 5. So in 21st place is You Only Live Twice, with a runtime of 1 hour 57 minutes.
And then in 22nd place is From Russia With Love with 1 hour 55 minutes.
23rd is Dr. No at 1 hour 51 minutes.
Next up, Goldfinger at 24, 1 hour 50 minutes.
And the shortest film of all, 25th place, was the quiz question answer from part 1's episode, Quantum of Solace, 1 hour 46 minutes.
And just a quick observation before we move on, Andy, is when you look at the longest 5 and the shortest 5, there's some real quality films there. There's not, you could say You Only Live Twice, maybe ranked a bit lower on, but there's some real quality films there. When you look at our list, they do feature high up on both our lists in terms of the rankings.
Indeed, it just goes to show that it's not how long it is, but it's what you do with it. I guess you could say. So, speaking of runtimes, let's go over the runtimes by the different Bond actors and their average runtime. The actor with the longest runtime, with only one film to be fair, was George Lazenby. His runtime was 2 hours 22 minutes.
Second up is Daniel Craig with 11 hours 44 minutes with the average of 2 hours 21 minutes.
Third place was Timothy Dalton, total 4 hours and 23, giving him an average runtime of 2 hours 12 minutes.
Next up, Pierce Brosnan with a total of 8 hours 30 minutes and an average of 2 hours 8 minutes.
Fifth place is Roger Moore. His total of 14 hours and 46 minutes gives him an average runtime of 2 hours and 7 minutes.
Last place, the OG Sean Connery at 11 hours 43 minutes, and that's an average of 1 hour 57 minutes.
Right, let's talk the body count, the James Bond kills only. James Bond obviously is known for his daring adventures and for being one of the deadliest fictional characters of all time.
So in this section again, we're going to recap the 5 deadliest and least deadly Bond films in the franchise. So this is going to be the last time I say this, Andy, but I just want to make it clear. Remember, everyone, check out the YouTube version or look on our website because we've got the full list available on our website.
Indeed, we'll have this and all the other rankings that are to come later on the website and YouTube version. So let's get into the deadliest 5 films. The first one on the list with a whopping 232 kills was Spectre.
Next up, No Time to Die, 66.
Third place was GoldenEye with 47 kills.
Next up is the Roger Moore classic, The Spy Who Loved Me, with 31.
And in joint fourth place, also with 31, was Die Another Day.
So that's the 5 deadliest. What about the 5 least deadly films in the Bond franchise? And in 21st position is Diamonds Are Forever with 7.
In 22nd place comes On Her Majesty's Secret Service with 5 kills.
Joint 22nd is A View to a Kill with 5 kills.
In 24th place is Dr. No with 4 kills.
So in last place, in 25th position, is the film with Bond with a third nipple, is The Man with a Golden Gun with the solitary kill of 1.
More nipples than kills in that particular film. So here's a reminder of the kill counts by the different James Bond actors and their average kills per film. So top of the list is Daniel Craig. 342 Bond kills in total. So across his 5 films, that gives him an average of 68.4.
So he is the deadliest Bond. So next up is Pierce Brosnan with 135 kills across the 4 films, which is an average of 33.8.
In third place, Roger Moore has a total of 90 kills, which across his 7 films gives him an average of 12.9.
Next up is Connery, 72 kills across his 6 films with an average of 12.
Fifth deadliest is Timothy Dalton, 23 kills in total across 2 films, so 11.5 average.
Propping up the bottom of the table is George Lazenby with 5 kills in his solo entry of 1 film, and that's obviously an average of 5. Even I can do the maths on that one, Andy.
Yeah, that wasn't part of the quiz question in part 1 of the special. So obviously, Lazenby's average kill count is skewed because he only featured in the 1 film. Who knows how many he would have had if he'd have continued.
And Andy, before we move on, I just want to say, and I don't know what your view is on this, I think I prefer when the kills are lower, where the kills are a bit more, they feel a bit more personal, where he has to kill, not where, you know, there's lots of different people dying because of, say, various explosions and stuff like that.
Killing for the sake of killing is maybe not as exciting, yeah. So it's picking and choosing your moments, isn't it?
It is indeed. We've got to talk about martinis now. So we do a martini watch. And as Andy mentioned in part 1 of the end of season special, across the 25 films that we've rewatched, Bond has ordered or drunk a martini in 18 films. So that leaves 7 films where Bond didn't drink and his iconic martini.
Yeah, so here's a quick summary of the different actors and their drinking habits, as it were. So Sean Connery had a martini in 3 films, but then didn't in 3. So he was 3 out of 6.
Yeah, or you could say 50%. Jules Lazenby had 1 martini in his only film, so he did well there.
Roger Moore was not a fan. 3 martinis, 4 films without, so 3 out of 7. So he's below the 50% threshold.
He is, yes. I'm glad you didn't ask me what the percentage would be on that one, Andy.
About 42 to 42.8%, I think it would be, something like that. I'm going to check that on the calculator then, because I blurted out a number and now I'm doubting myself.
Edit that out, and then, would know the audience will be none the wiser. Now, Dalton has had 2 films, obviously, and he's had 2 martinis.
Brosnan, 4 films, 4 martinis, is 100% as well.
And Daniel Craig, 5 films, and he's had 5 martinis. Or should I say 5, he drinks a martini in each film. He might have had multiple martinis in one film.
He had at least 6 on the plane, didn't he, on one of them?
Yeah, he did. And he must have had numerous ones playing poker in Casino Royale. So it should be noted as well, and I don't know if you say this is interesting or not, but there's an observation there that only Connery and Moore failed to drink a martini in at least one of their films.
Yeah, they didn't need the drink. But if you're curious into what goes into a Vesper martini, which is the one that Daniel Craig drank in his films, the ingredients are as follows. You need 3 ounces of gin, 1 ounce of vodka, half an ounce of quinoa lillet, and lemon peel for garnish.
So now I'm playing bartender, so my assistant Andy has got the ingredients for me, so thank you, Andy. Now you combine all the ingredients in a shaker with some ice, and you shake it for 30 seconds. Now you have to strain it into a chilled martini glass, and then garnish it with a bit of lemon peel, and enjoy that. Now Andy, I can't remember if I've asked you this during the pod. Have you ever had a vodka martini?
I don't think I have.
I was thinking, next time me and Andy don't really go out much. I think, on our next night out to celebrate, I think we should order a vodka martini. I'll let you go to the bar and order those though, Andy. I think we might get jumped in our local bar ordering a vodka martini.
I think we should go out on the town in our finest tuxedos, go to the local Wetherspoons and order a vodka martini and see how long the locals take to throw us through the window.
Indeed.
Other establishments are available as well. We're not sponsored by Wetherspoons, just for clarity. Let's move on though, because one of the things that happens in every Bond film, doesn't it, is Bond introducing himself as James Bond. It's the famous catchphrase associated with the fictional character Bond. It's a simple yet it's an iconic introduction, synonymous with the kind of suave and confidence that Bond portrays. Now, throughout season 1, we tracked how long it took Bond to say this iconic catchphrase. The shortest time was 1 minute and 30 seconds in the film Diamonds Are Forever, which was when Connery returned to the franchise after Lazenby's solo efforts.
Indeed, and the longest time it took Bond to say his iconic introduction was Daniel Craig's debut, Casino Royale, where he said it at the end, which was a very cool scene, actually. And Bond uses his iconic introduction in 21 Bond films, which came as a bit of a surprise to us, actually, because we discussed this as well in season 1, because we thought Bond uses famous catchphrase in all the Bond films, and that was quite surprising. Now, the 4 films that Bond fails to use his iconic catchphrase is Quantum of Solace, which is obviously a Daniel Craig film.
There was also From Russia With Love, where Sean Connery didn't say the phrase.
And Thunderball, also a Sean Connery film.
And finally, You Only Live Twice, yet another Connery film. Now, maybe during the infancy of the franchise, the producers, the writers, they were still working on the formula of James Bond, as it were, that made it so popular and successful.
Yeah, and I think you'd probably say that's probably explains why Connery features 3 out of the 4 times. I wonder, it must be in the books. I wonder if he says it in every book as well. It's something maybe we can research.
That is something to consider, yeah. Now, just going off script a little bit, do you remember back to episode 1 where we talked Dr. No? It was Sylvia Trench was actually the first one to bring this to the attention, because she introduced herself as Sylvia Trench, didn't she?
She did, yeah. Yeah, we discussed that, didn't we, in that episode?
So maybe she's the real innovator of the introduction. So we should give a little tip of the hat to Sylvia Trench there. And speaking of hats, let's talk about hat wearing and hat throwing. So James Bond, known for his iconic sense of style, his wardrobe often included a range of hats, the classic fedora to the more casual Panama hat, but is perhaps best known for the signature hat toss, which became a hallmark of the character.
Yeah, and Bond is seen wearing his hat in 11 films, and we see the iconic hat throw in just 7 films, which I found that quite surprising. Only Timothy Dalton's Bond fails to wear some form of hat in the franchise so far, so that's disappointing for Dalton's 2 entries there. So some highlights include Bond wearing a gondola hat in Moonraker. Now, I don't know if that's the correct saying for gondola hat, or, because it's on the gondola, it's a different name for the hat, but that's what I've put there when I could say it correctly.
Who drives the gondola? Is that a gondolier?
Gondolier? I don't... Yeah, maybe.
That's a word that sounds like I've made up, doesn't it?
I'm disagreeing with you, Andy. You're more educated than me. But anyway, that was one of the highlights, and that was obviously from Andy's favourite film, Moonraker. Roger Moore also wearing the reversible flat cap hat that was reversible, and that was the army officer hat as well, and Octopussy, which was another a good entry for the hat wearing segment. And also Brosnan wearing a hat when he's wearing his full naval Royal Navy outfit as well. I thought that was a nice little highlight.
Yeah, and we've purposely missed out Daniel Craig wearing a baseball cap for good reason. Because overall, James Bond, his hat and his hat tosses, they're iconic moments of the franchise, particularly in the early days, and it kind of adds to that character's timeless appeal and sense of style. Let's move on to Felix Leiter, one of the more established characters in the franchise. We all know about James Bond, British secret agent known by 007. Felix Leiter, on the other hand, is an American CIA operative. Often collaborates with Bond. They join up together on quite a few missions, don't they?
They do, and Felix is portrayed as Bond's ally and close friend in many of the James Bond films, and obviously, as Andy mentioned in the quiz in part 1, he obviously Bond attends Felix Leiter's wedding as well. So Leiter is known for his easygoing personality and is often portrayed as kind of the counterbalance to Bond's more serious, stoic demeanour.
Yeah, Leiter's depicted as a loyal friend, trusted confidant to Bond, and like I mentioned, he provides support and assistance during their missions.
And obviously during the podcast we tracked how often Felix Leiter appears. So he featured in 10 of the official Bond films, and he's been portrayed by 7 different actors during the time, and we do discuss that in the episodes, especially the early ones where they keep cutting and changing the Felix Leiter actor. So only 2 actors have played the role of Leiter more than once, David Hedison and Jeffrey Wright. Incidentally, they are actually my 2 favourite actors, Andy, for Leiter. What about you? Do you have a particular favourite actor?
It's got to be Jeffrey Wright. For me, he's the only one that really stands out, and that's probably partly due to the chopping and changing. So you don't have a face of Leiter in the same way you have a face of Bond. But Jeffrey Wright is an excellent actor, does a brilliant job in all 3 of the films, and I've seen him in a few other things as well. I'm a big fan, but he does a great job as Felix Leiter.
Yeah, the reason why I say David Hedison is when I think of Leiter, and I do think of Jeffrey Wright as well in the Craig films, but because I've only seen the Craig films once, well obviously twice now because we're doing the end of season 1, I think of Leiter in the scene from License to Kill. You know when Dalton Bond finds Leiter in the what do you call it, when the dead body in the black sheeting and his legs have been taken off by the shark, body bag. That's just my thought when I think of Felix Leiter. That is the scene that comes to mind. But no, Leiter's an important character within the Bond films. So now one of the things we talk about is the box office. The Bond franchise has been entertaining audiences for over half a century, and with each film it's brought in millions. of revenue, and obviously the later ones have been billions, or at least $1 billion. So what has made the Bond franchise so successful at the box office? Is it the suave, sophisticated secret agent? Is it the action and adventure that we see that Bond encounters in each film? Could it be the exotic locations, the fast cars, the cool gadgets? Is it the famous Bond theme songs or the opening title sequences? Or is it the glamorous Bond girls or villains?
I would say it's probably all of the above, isn't it?
It's a good combination, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely that combination that has made Bond one of the most successful franchises of all time. I think in terms of other franchises, you've got Harry Potter, you've got Star Wars, you've got the Marvel Cinematic Universe that probably bring in more money, but it's probably it, isn't it? Is there any others?
No, Bond is, at the time of recording, was the fourth biggest franchise behind those ones. Don't get me wrong, I like a Harry Potter film, and I do like the MCU films. Star Wars, I watch them, although I haven't seen them all, actually. But James Bond, yeah, they've got the perfect formula, haven't they?
They do seem to have. For me, Bond is by far head and shoulders above those franchises in terms of quality, but that's just one man's opinion. Let's have a quick recap of some of the stats that we've discussed throughout Season 1. So the overall budget of the 25 films, just over $1.8 billion. Quite a lot of money spent on there, but the overall box office came in at just under $7.7 billion, so a really good return. And when you adjust the box office for today's money, you end up with an adjusted total of just over $19.2 billion.
Oh, that's a lot of money, Andy. What we could do with that? We could hire an editor and an artist and I'm trying to think of some other people we could help out, and we could hire a researcher, a team of researchers, and me and you can just basically watch the films each week and do the recording, and we can have our team of people behind us.
Some people might want us to hire someone else to record for us as well.
We could have a glamorous assistant as well. Anyway, so let's have a quick look at the top 5 films based on the adjusted box office. So I'm going to kick us off. So we've got Skyfall in at number 1 with $1.4 billion.
Yeah, second place is Thunderball for the adjusted box office, which comes in at $1.3 billion in today's money.
And another classic is Goldfinger at $1.1 billion.
In fourth place in adjusted box office is 1973's Live and Let Die, which in today's money would be about $1 billion.
And joint fourth place with Live and Let Die is Spectre, with also $1 billion.
Okay, so let's recap the adjusted box office by Bond actor. So top of the pile, based on adjusted box office, is Daniel Craig. Total $4.82 billion across his 5 films, for an average of just under $964 million.
So next up is Sean Connery with just under $5.5 billion, but across the 6 films, that is an average of just under $915 million.
Third place, Roger Moore. Total adjusted box office of $4.83 billion across 7 films, so his average comes in at just under $690 million.
Next up is Jules Lazenby with an adjusted box office of $653.5 million, but obviously he's only had the one film, so it's the same average.
Yeah, fifth place, Pierce Brosnan. His 4 films brought in just under $2.6 billion in adjusted box office, which gives him an average of $648.5 million.
And propping up the table is Timothy Dalton with $853.7 million, and that's obviously 2 films, so the average is $426.85 million. And looking at that, Andy, I'm quite surprised Brosnan's quite low down, because I thought his box office would be quite high in terms of the period of films, but maybe, like we said, Die Another Day and Too Many Gadgets, maybe the audiences were turning off. But as we've said in now main podcasts, none of the films have been box office failures. They've all recouped loads of money for the producers.
Indeed, yeah. The profits speak for themselves. I mean, obviously, you take into account things like economy and the different times the film's released, so that's going to have some impact, but very healthy profit margin for everyone, it has to be said. You love talking about money. I'm sure that's getting you going, but I'd prefer to talk about Bond girls, if I'm honest. So that's what we're going to do next. So, as we mentioned in part 1, 77 Bond girls in total across the 25 films. From Ursula Andress in Dr. No to Léa Seydoux in No Time to Die. The Bond franchise has introduced us to some of the most beautiful and talented actresses from across the globe.
The earlier Bond girls tended to be there for eye candy or a bit of a love interest for Bond, and there was even the occasional sexism too. However, the Bond girls have changed through the years, and they're now more empowered and strong and capable now, and it kind of goes back to the point from part 1 of The Wife, really, about, the 007 being cast as a lady, Nomi.
Indeed, yeah. There's been quite a lot of memorable Bond girls over the years. Shall we look at some of our favourites? Shall we revisit our rankings, and we'll talk about our top 5 from season 1. So, Jay, do you want to kick us off with a reminder of your top 5 Bond girls?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with Tracy Bond, also known as Teresa Del Vincenzo, from Majesty's Secret Service, Pussy Galore, Goldfinger, Tatiana Romanova from Russia with Love, and Anya Amasova, The Spy Who Loved Me, and then Melina Havelock from Your Eyes Only. So some of the old classics there. How about you, Andy? What's your top 5? Can you remind the listeners?
Yeah, we've got some similarities, although my list does look very different on first viewing. So top of my list is Tatiana Romanova, who was in From Russia with Love. Second place, Pussy Galore from Goldfinger. I've got Dr. Madeline Swan, who was in Spectre and No Time to Die, in at third place. Anya Amasova, The Spy Who Loved Me, comes in at number 4. And then my number 5 Bond girl is Tracy Bond, Teresa Di Vincenzo, from On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
And it's an interesting observation, really, because when you look at the top 5 Bond girls, we've got the same 4, but in a different order. So the only difference there is Melina Havelock, and I have Melina, and you have Dr. Madeline Swan. I think that's just interesting, really.
Yeah, we have very similar tastes when it comes to top quality Bond girls, I guess you could say. Now let's move on to theme songs. So the Bond franchise produced some of the most memorable and iconic songs in film history, I would argue. They tend to get it right when they choose the band or the singer for each film, and the majority of the theme songs have featured vocals, but we have had the occasional instrumental version.
Yeah, and the theme songs are a significant part of the Bond franchise and have featured some of the most popular singers at that time.
So let's give the listeners a reminder of our top 5, shall we? Jay, do you want to go first again?
Yeah, I go first, Andy. So, number 1, A View to a Kill by Duran Duran. Diamonds Are Forever by Shirley Bassey. Goldfinger at number 3 by Shirley Bassey again. For Your Eyes Only at number 4 by Sheena Easton. And making my top 5 is License to Kill by Gladys Knight. What about you, Andy?
So again, we've got some differences, but we also have some similarities, particularly at number 1. I've also got A View to a Kill by Duran Duran. Number 2, I've got Live and Let Die by Paul McCartney and Wings. In third place, I've got Goldfinger by Shirley Bassey. Number 4, No Time to Die by Billie Eilish. And then rounding out my top 5 is Nobody Does It Better by Carly Simon.
So yeah, we got some that's the same, but no dispute in our number 1, is there, Andy? We're both singing from the same hymn sheet there. No pun intended. But...
You could say it's Top of the Pops.
You could, yes.
Pun intended.
So moving on, one of the other regular features is the opening credits. So the James Bond opening title sequence are a hallmark of the popular film franchise. Now, each film typically features a unique opening sequence that showcases a montage of images, stylish graphics, and thinking and going all the way back to episode 2 from Russia with Love. That's when we saw the introduction of the iconic sexy models in the opening title sequence.
Yeah, there's been some really iconic opening title sequences in the 25 films that we've seen. Let's check out our top 5 again, shall we? Shall I start this time? So my favourite opening sequence of all was Live and Let Die. Second place, I've put Spectre. Third place, I've put Skyfall. Number 4, I've put Thunderball. And in at number 5, I've got Goldfinger. So there's my top 5, Jay. Why don't you give the listeners a recap of your top 5?
So my top 5 was Goldfinger in number 1, Die Another Day, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Skyfall, and then making my top 5 is Tomorrow Never Dies.
So we're starting to see some differences appear, aren't we? Not much of an overlap with our lists above. Skyfall and Goldfinger, the only ones in both of our top 5s.
Yeah, when you think about and when you look at the whole list of the 25 opening credits, I think this is one of the areas where we've got quite a lot of variation. And one of the things that I like about Goldfinger is the throwbacks that they did to the earlier films. Now, moving on, this next one, we can't really skip the villains, can we? So this is the main villains, or henchmen. Now, a villain can make or break a Bond film, in my opinion, and a great Bond villain needs to be memorable, pose a credible threat. They've got to be an element of intrigue as well. So when I say about intrigue, it's kind of like they're a bit of an interesting backstory as well that kind of sheds some light on their motives as well. And to a lesser extent, but I do think it is quite important, and Andy, I'm intrigued to hear what you think about that, about this bit. They should have some kind of distinctive physical appearance. So you've got Goldfinger's obsession with gold, you've got Jaws' metal teeth, you've also got Raoul Silver's blonde hair as well.
Yeah, I think the look is particularly important. I think for the primary henchman, arguably more so than the villain. If you're looking for that physical imposing side, so the height, the weight, the muscle, but also the imposing thing, like the Jaws metal teeth, for example, is a great visual aid to show just how menacing and dangerous he is. So I'm in complete agreement with you there. Now, the villains, they often have elaborate schemes to take over the world, control a valuable resource, oil, money, water, whatever it may be, or just simply get revenge. The Bond villains, integral to the franchise, and they also play a crucial role in defining the character of Bond himself. And I think what makes Bond villains so important is that they serve as a foil to James Bond. They're the perfect adversary to Bond's heroic character, force him to use his intelligence, his strengths, and, in a lot of cases, his gadgets to overcome their evil plans.
And kind of like we mentioned in part 1 of the end of season special, in many ways the Bond villains are just as iconic as Bond himself. So let's have a quick recap of the top 5 Bond villains. Andy, do you want to go first?
Indeed. So my favourite villain of all was Raoul Silver from Skyfall. I've got Auric Goldfinger from Goldfinger in at number 2, and then his primary henchman Oddjob from Goldfinger in at number 3. Jaws from The Spy Who Loved Me in at number 4, and then rounding out my top 5, I've got Ernst Stavro Blofeld, who was played by Donald Pleasance in You Only Live Twice. How does your top 5 compare, Jay?
Yeah, so a bit of overlap here. So I've got Goldfinger at number 1 in Goldfinger. Blofeld from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, though, so that's Telly Savalas. And then number 3, Blofeld again, but this time Donald Pleasance from You Only Live Twice. Jaws in at number 4, like you, from The Spy Who Loved Me. And then Red Grant, so going all the way back to Episode 2, Film 2 of the Bond franchise from What Shall We Love? He stands out for me, he does. Even all that time. But we can both see we've got Goldfinger in our list, and that's obviously all the way back to film 3. So classics and
the gold standard of Bond villain, you could say.
Indeed. Now, we're talking about film, so let's move on to our film ranking. So the Bond franchise brings its own unique style, characters, storylines to the table. We've obviously mentioned, Bond girls, Bond villains, the gadgets, etc. There's so many different bits of the franchise, but they are very subjective as well in terms of the rankings. So different fans, me and Andy will have different views on what is our favourite. So Andy, do you want to go first in terms of your listing your top 5 Bond films?
Indeed. So my favourite Bond film of all was Skyfall, which I gave a perfect 10 out of 10. Second place, I had Casino Royale with a 9 out of 10. No Time to Die came in third place, also with a 9 out of 10. And then Goldfinger is my fourth favourite, yet again with a 9 out of 10. And then rounding out my top 5 is The World Is Not Enough, which I gave 8 out of 10. How does that compare with your top 5 movies, Jay?
We've got a little bit of overlap. A quick look. There looks like 2 there. So Goldfinger, number 1 for me, 9 out of 10. So like I said earlier on in part 1, no Bond film's got the perfect 10 out of 10 for me. On Her Majesty's Secret Service was 8 out of 10 at number 2. Also 8 out of 10 is From Russia With Love in number 3. Daniel Craig's debut, number 4 of Casino Royale, 8 out of 10. And Pierce Brosnan's debut, actually, number 5, 8 out of 10. So, Andy, I haven't mentioned this, but I just wondered, if you were going to rewatch any Bond film next week, which one would it be? It doesn't obviously have to be your favourite Skyfall. Which one would you happen to pick if you had a few hours to kill? Just out of interest.
So right now, I would go with Casino Royale. If you ask me that same question tomorrow, I might have a different answer. But the one that comes to mind right now, I think, you know what? I fancy watching Casino Royale.
Interesting. So that would be number 2 in your rankings. I think I'd go back to From Russia With Love. Just that whole train sequence in the train station, where we talked about Bond walking on the platform and Red Grant in the train, and just going back to kind of like the original spy film of Bond. I just after we've rewatched them all over, the 25 episodes, From Russia With Love is the one I just think, if I had a couple of hours to kill, that's going to be the one I think I'd rewatch next week, kind of thing. I'm just intrigued, really, what you thought. It's
a good shout, and also it has my favourite Bond girl.
It does, yeah.
As well, so that's a reason to watch. I might change my mind now you said that.
Yeah, I think her mouth's a bit too big for you, though, isn't she?
Just the right size, I would say. Maybe too small. But enough of our nonsense. Let's see what the experts think, shall we? So, what were the top 5 on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes? Jay, kick us off with IMDb. What did they have to say for themselves about the Bond franchise?
So IMDb, they do a rating out of 10, but they have points, as in 0.8, 0.7, etc. So Casino Royale, Daniel Craig's debut, is their highest rated film with 8 out of 10. Skyfall is 7.8. Goldfinger 7.7. From Russia With Love in 4th place with 7.4. And then the last film, as at the time of recording, No Time to Die, in at number 5 at 7.3. How does that differ to the Rotten Tomatoes top 5, Andy?
So we've got a little bit of overlap, but a different order. So Rotten Tomatoes do it on a percentage basis. They've got Goldfinger at the top with 99% rating. From Russia With Love comes in second at 97%. Dr. No in at third place with 95%. Casino Royale with 94%, and then Skyfall with 92%. So there's overlap with our lists on both the IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes side.
One of the things that surprised me was seeing No Time to Die in the IMDb top list, and also Daniel Craig features heavily in the top 5 for IMDb because 3 of the top 5 are his films. And another interesting observation before I kind of pass over to you is both the lists only feature films from Daniel Craig and Sean Connery. Whereas obviously my list, I've got a solo entry of Jules Lazenby, and you've got one from Pierce Brosnan. So do you have any kind of like surprises from, what the experts think compared to our little pod?
I thought it was interesting to see Dr. No and From Russia With Love included in the list. But at least they didn't include Moonraker.
Well, okay, so Moonraker is obviously one of your classics. So let's have a quick look on IMDb. And let me look on IMDb and you can look on Rotten Tomatoes. So let me just have a quick look. Okay, so on IMDb, Moonraker is ranked 24th in terms of the official Bond films, with only the Pierce Brosnan classic Die Another Day scoring lower.
That is interesting, and it's hard to disagree. For them to be that low down, but Rotten Tomatoes is a slightly different story. I'm surprised to see this, but Tomorrow Never Dies, Die Another Day, The World Is Not Enough, Octopussy, The Man with the Golden Gun, and A View to a Kill all score lower than Moonraker, which is shocking to me, particularly The World Is Not Enough, which is in my top 5 because it is an absolute classic. Rotten Tomatoes, you know nothing.
Andy, when you said about The World Is Not Enough there, I was laughing inside and also outside, to be fair. I was on mute because obviously I know that is one of your favourite films. But Pierce Brosnan's not getting much love, is he, on Rotten Tomatoes? He's got 3 films there in the bottom section. It's disappointing. And the other ones are Roger Moore films, so... It's Roger Moore has been scored. When you think of it, he's obviously in Moonraker as well, and then he's in Octopussy, The Man with a Golden Gun, and A View to a Kill. So he's not getting much love.
That doesn't sit right with me, that particularly. So from now on, tomatoes is no longer going to be in my 5 a day.
Well, I might take a different approach and eat more tomatoes just to get rid of them. So another thing before I move on, Andy, and I was going to say, I wonder if it's because Daniel Craig features so heavily in both lists because he's the latest Bond that's around. So maybe in the future when whoever gets cast and they release the films, is that actor going to be on there? Because are more people... I can't think of the word, but thinking like the modern films are better just generally because they're newer. But then it goes against the point with Sean Connery featuring on there. But then are people picking Sean Connery because he's the OG? I just find it quite interesting that the top 5 on both of those platforms only featured those 2 actors. And like I said, you've got Brosnan and I've got George Lazenby in there throwing in the mix. It's just a comment there, Andy.
Yeah, it's I guess some of it will be generational, but yeah, fascinating to see how it played out on those particular sites. So
we've just been talking about Bond actors, so it seems natural that we talk about Bond actors now in our next section. So again, this is very much the best, it's very much a personal opinion. So the films are very subjective, and same with the Bond actors, it is a matter of personal opinion. Each actor who has portrayed the iconic characters brought various different elements and kind of a unique interpretation to the role.
Yeah, however, I would say fans and critics and myself, a lot would consider Sean Connery to be the quintessential James Bond. Connery played the character for the first 5 films of the franchise, starting with Dr. No in 1962 and then ending with You Only Live Twice in 1967, and then he came back for one more run in Diamonds Are Forever in 1971. So he kind of established many of the defining traits of the character. The suave demeanour, the dry wit, the cool confidence under pressure. They're all defining traits established by Connery.
They are, but also other actors that have portrayed James Bond include obviously Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig, and they each bring their own style and interpretation to the character as well.
Yeah, but like you said, ultimately the best Bond actor is personal preference, and it depends which one really resonates with the individual viewer. So speaking of, we're individual viewers ourselves, so let's check out our rankings. Joe, how would you rank the Bond actors now we're at the end of season 1?
So I'm going to list them 1 to 6. So I'm going to go with my favourite first off. So it is Sean Connery. And then next up is Pierce Brosnan. So we've said it before, and Andy has probably said it more times than me. A good Bond actor doesn't necessarily mean that the film's good, and vice versa. A bad film doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad Bond actor. Daniel Craig in at number 3. 4 is Roger Moore. 5 is Timothy Dalton, and 6 is Jules Lazenby. How about you, Andy? How did you rate the Bond actors 1 to 6?
So I had Daniel Craig in at number 1, Sean Connery in second place, Pierce Brosnan third, Roger Moore fourth, George Lazenby in at fifth, and then Timothy Dalton was bottom of my list.
So we've got a bit of variation there, haven't we, Andy? Bottom 2 are the same, but bottom 2 are the same, but in different places. We've got the same fourth position with Roger Moore. Then the top 3 are the same, but just in different positions. So before we started the podcast, we actually wrote down our rankings as well before we started the journey of rewatching the 25 films.
Yeah, so let's see how our original rankings compare, shall we? So I had Daniel Craig in at number 1, and he stayed as such. Connery in at 2, remained at number 2, but then this is where we start to get a little bit of difference on my list. So I originally had Roger Moore in at number 3 and Pierce Brosnan in at number 4, but upon rewatching I've switched the order around. And similarly for 5th and 6th place, I had Timothy Dalton in 5th above George Lazenby in 6th, but upon rewatching for season 1 I've ended up with George Lazenby above Dalton. So a little bit of a change up there in my order. Jay, how was your Bond order before compared to after?
Similar to you, Andy, in terms of a bit of change, and it did surprise me. So originally, this surprised me because Pierce Brosnan was my favourite Bond actor, so I had him at number 1. And then Sean Connery at number 2, Craig at 3, Moore at 4, George Lazenby at 5, and Timothy Dalton. Now, thinking back, and I have mentioned this before in a pod, I wasn't looking forward to the Timothy Dalton films at all. From memory, those 2 were my least favourite. However, I actually thought he was pretty good, even though George Lazenby's On Her Majesty's Secret Service made my top 5. I couldn't really have him higher than 6th position. For me, Pierce Brosnan, if he had better films, he could have kept number 1 in my ranking. But because I think Pierce Brosnan is probably one of the most rounded Bond actors. But his films just declined in quality for me. So that's why he's not my favourite. But he is in the top 2. What about you, Andy? Is there any kind of observations in terms of surprises or, in terms of what you did before and once we finished the 25 films?
So Brosnan was a surprise for me in that he was a better Bond than I remember him being, even though, to your point around the quality of films, Die Another Day, his final outing was a real drop in quality in terms of the film. He was still very good in the role. And similarly, I didn't remember George Lazenby being quite as good as he was. So although he's ended up 5th on my list of 6, I think he did a fine job in his one outing. And, we mentioned on the main pod, it would have been interesting to see how he would have fared given 2 or 3 more goes at the role. Dalton was probably least memorable early doors, but I seemed to remember him being better than Lazenby, but he was the one I was disappointed by. Not that he did a bad job, because I don't think anyone did a bad job, but he was the one that disappointed me of the list.
Be interesting to see what listeners think as well, because when you look at the James Bond subreddit, you get some hot takes and debates about who the favourite Bond is, but like we've both said, it is very much a subjective and a personal opinion, so there's no right or wrong, is there?
No, indeed. Opinions are like souls. Everyone's got one. Some of them stink. But yeah, the opinions of not only the actors, but the movies and all the elements of the Bond franchise that we've spoken about is up for debate. And we'd love to hear from listeners if they have any differing opinions, same opinions. We're open to challenge on anything that we've spoken about. But that kind of brings us to the end of this episode and also the end of season 1. It's been quite the journey. We've spoken about arguably one of the most famous fictional characters of all time. And season 2 is going to kick off very, very soon. We're not taking any breaks. We're going straight into season 2 with arguably one of the best actors of all time, because season 2 is all about Tom Hanks. Yeah, we're going to be talking about some of the better films of the Tom Hanks era. We're not going to be going through every single one. There's too many to cover, but season 2 is starting next week, so we need to start big, don't we? We need a big episode to start season 2 of the Tom Hanks era. What can we do that makes this episode big? That's what I want to know. Well, of course, we're going to start with the film Big. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next week for season 2 of The Rating Room.
Well, that's this week's episode done. We hope you enjoyed it.
Special thanks to the band Sugar Tongue for the theme tune to The Rating Room. You can find them on all the usual social media channels, and be sure to check out their song The System, available now on Spotify.
You can find and message us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram by searching The Rating Room.
You'll find all our social media links on our website, theratingroom.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or feel free to drop us an email at theratingroom@gmail.com. Goodbye, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, right here on The Rating Room.